Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. The plate in Emma's hand trembled slightly as she watched the diner's door swing open with a sharp creak. It was an unusually slow afternoon at Miller's Diner, the kind where the hum of conversations mixed lazily with the clatter of silverware and the occasional hiss of the coffee machine. Nothing exciting ever happened in this small town, until today. He walked in, and everything froze. The man looked like he had been dragged through hell and back. His uniform, if you could still call it that, was torn and stained, his boots caked with mud and dust. His hair was matted against his forehead, and his face, though young, was weathered and hollow. But it was his eyes that hit Emma the hardest. Empty. Exhausted. Lost. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Forks hovered above plates. Even the jukebox in the corner seemed to hum lower, as if respecting the heaviness that entered the room. Emma's boss, Rick, leaned out from the kitchen window, his expression hardening the second he spotted the newcomer. He didn't have to say anything, Emma knew the rules. This was a business, not a charity. No money, no meal. And yet. Emma watched the man scan the diner like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be there at all. His shoulders slumped further when he noticed the stares, the tight-lipped frowns. He moved toward the farthest booth in the corner and sat down slowly, as if every muscle in his body hurt. He didn't ask for a menu. He didn't wave a server over. He just sat there, head bowed, hands trembling slightly on the cracked tabletop. Emma's heart ached. She knew that kind of look. She had seen it before, in the mirror, after nights crying over unpaid bills and empty cupboards. Desperation had a smell. A weight. And this man was carrying it like an anchor around his neck. Without thinking, Emma set down the plate she was carrying for another customer and headed for the kitchen. Rick was waiting. "Don't even think about it," he said, wiping his hands on a grease-stained towel. "Rick, come on," Emma pleaded. "He's starving." Rick's jaw tightened. "This is a business. You want to feed every stray that walks in here, you'll be out of a job by the weekend. Got it?" Emma swallowed hard. Her paycheck barely covered rent as it was. But there was something about the way that man looked, like he had lost not just a home, but maybe a piece of his soul, that made it impossible to walk away. Without another word, Emma grabbed a clean plate, scooped a generous helping of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and gravy onto it, and filled a mug with fresh coffee. Rick barked something behind her, but Emma didn't listen. Crossing the diner, she placed the plate and mug gently in front of the man. "Eat," she said softly. "It's on the house." The man looked up at her then. Really looked. His lips parted, but no words came out. His hands, rough and calloused, hovered uncertainly over the food, as if afraid it might vanish. Emma smiled, a small, reassuring thing, and gave a tiny nod. He picked up the fork with shaking fingers and took his first bite. The entire diner seemed to exhale. Conversation started up again, though quieter, more cautious. People shot glances their way, some curious, some judgmental. Emma didn't care. She returned to the counter, pretending to clean menus while stealing glances at him. He ate slowly at first, savoring each bite like it might be his last. Then hunger took over, and he devoured the food in minutes, draining the coffee cup with desperate gulps. When he finished, he sat back, closed his eyes, and for the first time since he had walked in, seemed to breathe. Emma wanted to go over and ask his name, hear his story. But something held her back. Maybe it was the way he sat so still, like a wild animal afraid of sudden movements. Maybe it was the way his eyes darted to the windows every few seconds, as if expecting something, or someone. She didn't know it then, but that decision, to help him without asking for anything in return, would set off a chain of events no one in that diner could have predicted. It would change her life forever. The next few hours passed in a blur. The soldier remained in the booth, occasionally sipping a refill of coffee Emma brought without charging him. The other customers came and went, some tossing uneasy glances at the strange figure in the corner. Rick stayed behind the counter, shooting Emma disapproving looks, but saying nothing more. As closing time approached, Emma noticed the man stand slowly, stretching like someone who hadn't had a proper bed in weeks. He pulled something from his pocket, a battered, torn photo, and stared at it for a long moment before tucking it carefully away. Then, without a word, he shuffled toward the door. Emma hesitated, heart pounding. Should she say something? Offer help? A place to stay? Before she could make up her mind, he paused at the door and turned to look at her. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other across the room. Then he nodded, a deep, solemn nod full of meaning she couldn't quite understand, and stepped out into the gathering dusk. The bell over the door jingled, and he was gone. Emma stood frozen for a long moment, the memory of his hollow eyes burned into her mind. Hope you're happy, Rick muttered, wiping down the counter. Now we're down a plate and a meal. Emma said nothing. She just kept staring at the door. Something about the whole encounter didn't feel finished. And deep down, she knew in a way that had no logic or reason, that she hadn't seen the last of him. The next morning started like any other. Emma arrived early, apron slung over her shoulder, hair tied back in a messy bun. She unlocked the door, flipped the sign to open, and began setting up the coffee machines. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a warm golden glow across the empty parking lot. The world felt still, ordinary, safe. Until she heard it. A low rumble, distant at first, then growing louder by the second. Emma frowned, stepping outside onto the sidewalk, shading her eyes against the morning light. At first, she thought it was construction trucks. Maybe a parade? Then she saw them. Dark shapes in the sky. Moving fast. Coming straight for the diner. Helicopters. 3 of them, black and massive, their blades slicing the air with a thunderous roar. They hovered for a moment above the parking lot before descending slowly, kicking up clouds of dust and loose gravel. Emma stumbled back, coughing, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. Doors slammed open. Men in black suits spilled out, moving with military precision. Big, official-looking vehicles screeched into the lot behind them. Within seconds, the tiny diner was surrounded. Rick ran out from the kitchen, wiping his hands furiously. What the hell is going on? Emma couldn't speak. She couldn't move. One of the men, wearing sunglasses and an earpiece, approached her. His voice was calm, but firm. Are you the woman who served the soldier yesterday? Emma's mouth went dry. She nodded. The man smiled, an actual, genuine smile, and said words that would change her life forever. Ma'am, you're going to want to come with us. Dust swirled around Emma's feet as the helicopters finally powered down, their deafening roar giving way to a heavy, almost unnatural silence. The man in black, with his neatly pressed suit and calm, commanding voice, stood just a few feet away, waiting for her answer. Ma'am, are you the woman who served the soldier yesterday? He repeated. Emma swallowed hard, her throat dry as sandpaper. Her heart thundered in her chest, and her palms turned clammy. She glanced around the parking lot, now swarming with black SUVs and heavily armed personnel. Rick hovered behind her, wide-eyed and pale. I gave him some food, she stammered. That's all. The man nodded slightly, as if that was exactly the answer he expected. Good, he said. We need you to come with us. It's urgent. Rick stepped forward, puffing up his chest. Now wait just a damn minute, she's not going anywhere without some answers. The man gave Rick a brief glance, a look that was polite but firm. Sir, I assure you, Miss Emma is not in trouble. But time is critical. We'll explain everything once we're in a secure location. Emma's mind raced. Secure location? Critical? This was insane. Only yesterday, she was just a waitress trying to make ends meet. Today, helicopters and government agents were surrounding her. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But somewhere deep inside, a quieter voice whispered, "Trust him." Maybe it was the same instinct that told her to feed the soldier. Maybe it was destiny. Taking a shaky breath, Emma nodded. "I'll go," she said. The man smiled again, and for a moment. Emma thought she saw relief flicker across his face. "This way, ma'am." He led her carefully toward one of the black SUVs. Emma could feel the eyes of the entire diner, customers, co-workers, passers-by, burning into her back. Rick called after her, "You call me the second you can. You hear me, Em?" She turned briefly and gave a small nod before sliding into the SUV's cool leather interior. The door slammed shut, cutting her off from everything familiar. Inside the SUV, another agent handed her a bottle of water and a blanket, even though the day was warm. "You're safe," he assured her. "Just stay calm." Emma clutched the bottle tightly, her fingers trembling. The vehicle started moving, and she watched the diner grow smaller in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the dust and the morning sun. Minutes passed in tense silence. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Emma asked, "Please, can someone tell me what's happening?" The first agent, the one who approached her, turned slightly in his seat. "My name is Agent Brooks. We're with a special division of Homeland Security. Yesterday, you made contact with an individual we've been searching for, someone extremely important." Emma blinked in confusion. "A soldier? He didn't seem. I mean, he didn't even have money for food." Brooks gave a small, grim smile. "He's not just a soldier, ma'am. He's a key figure in an operation that could affect national security. Until yesterday, we thought he was dead." Emma's stomach twisted painfully. "What kind of operation?" she whispered. Brooks hesitated, then said, "That information is classified. What matters now is that your act of kindness saved his life. And because of that, a lot of other lives might be saved too." Emma leaned back against the seat, her head spinning. What on earth had she gotten herself into? After nearly an hour of driving through winding country roads and heavily forested areas, the SUV pulled up to a tall, gray building surrounded by a high fence and security cameras. Emma's heart sank. This didn't look like a place she could leave whenever she wanted. She was escorted inside, through metal detectors and past guards, until she reached a small, sterile-looking room with a single table and 2 chairs. "Please wait here," Brooks said, offering another smile that did little to ease her nerves. "Someone will be with you shortly." Emma sat, tapping her foot nervously. The walls felt like they were closing in. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, the door opened. A woman in military fatigues stepped in, carrying a clipboard. She was tall, with sharp features and a no-nonsense air. "I'm Captain Reynolds," she said briskly. "Thank you for coming, Miss Emma." Emma nodded, unsure what to say. Captain Reynolds sat down across from her and placed the clipboard on the table. "You must be wondering why you're here." "That would be an understatement," Emma said, her voice shaky. Captain Reynolds actually smiled, a warm, real smile that softened her hard edges. "You showed compassion to someone when most would have looked away. That man you helped, his name is Staff Sergeant Daniel Cole." Emma's breath caught. Daniel. He hadn't even told her his name. Daniel was part of a covert operation overseas. His team was compromised, and he was captured. For months, we believed he had been killed. She paused. But he escaped. And somehow, he found his way back onto American soil. He's carrying information, vital intelligence, that certain groups would do anything to keep hidden. Emma's head spun. I don't understand. Why me? Why bring me here? Captain Reynolds leaned forward. Because Daniel trusts you. In the short time he interacted with you, you showed him something he hadn't seen in a long time, basic human kindness. Emma felt her cheeks flush. I just gave him a meal. Exactly, Reynolds said softly. When the world treated him like he didn't exist, you reminded him he was still human. That made all the difference. She stood up and walked slowly around the room. We need your help, Emma. Daniel's condition is fragile. He's severely malnourished, traumatized, and wary of anyone in uniform. She turned, fixing Emma with a piercing gaze. But he asked for you. Emma stared at her in shock. He wants to see me. Captain Reynolds nodded. Will you talk to him? Help us reach him? Emma's mind screamed no. This wasn't her world. She was just a waitress, struggling to pay rent, not a part of military operations and government secrets. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she saw his face, the gratitude, the brokenness, the silent plea for help. She couldn't turn her back on him. Not now. Taking a deep breath, Emma stood. I'll do it. Captain Reynolds smiled, this time a full, proud smile. Good. He's just down the hall. Emma followed Reynolds through a series of stark corridors, her heart hammering in her chest. They stopped outside a door guarded by 2 armed soldiers. Captain Reynolds nodded to the guards, who opened the door and stepped aside. Emma walked in. The room was small, with a single bed and a chair. And there, sitting on the edge of the bed, was Daniel. He looked even worse up close. Thinner, paler, shadows under his eyes so dark they looked like bruises. But when he saw her, something changed. His whole body sagged in relief. Emma smiled gently and crossed the room, sitting down in the chair across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel said, his voice raspy, "Didn't think I'd see you again." Emma laughed softly, tears burning her eyes. "Neither did I." He leaned forward slightly, wincing with the movement. You saved me." Emma shook her head. "No, Daniel. You saved yourself. I just gave you a little help." They sat like that for a long time, just 2 broken people finding comfort in each other's presence. But deep inside, Emma knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Because Daniel had secrets that could change everything. And very soon, Emma would find herself pulled into a world of danger, betrayal, and a mystery deeper than she ever imagined. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly as Emma sat across from Daniel, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Though they were in the same room, it felt like there was a canyon between them, filled with words unsaid and truths yet uncovered. Daniel's hands, rough and scarred, twisted nervously in his lap. He looked like he was carrying the weight of 100 lives on his shoulders. Emma broke the silence first. "They told me you have information. Something important. Something dangerous." Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared down at the floor, as if gathering the courage to pull words from the pit of his memory. Finally, in a low voice, he said, "I wasn't supposed to survive. None of us were." Emma leaned forward slightly. "What happened, Daniel?" He looked up at her, his eyes haunted. "They sent us into a village, deep in the mountains. They told us it was a rescue mission. Find the hostages. Get them out." He swallowed hard. But it wasn't a rescue. It was a cover-up. Emma felt the air around her grow heavy. "What do you mean?" Daniel's voice dropped even lower, barely a whisper. "There were no hostages. There was no enemy camp. There was something hidden underground, something they didn't want the world to find." Emma's blood turned cold. What was it? She asked. Daniel hesitated, glancing nervously toward the door. Even though they were supposedly safe inside a government facility, he looked like he feared someone might be listening. After a long pause, he said, "A facility. Old, abandoned, or so they claimed. But inside, there were documents. Files. Photos." He clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. Experiments. Emma's stomach twisted into knots. What kind of experiments? Daniel's eyes flashed with anger and horror. Human experiments. They were doing things that should never happen to anyone. Testing drugs. Weapons. Genetic mutations. And not just on enemies. On civilians. On their own people. Emma covered her mouth with her hand. It was too monstrous to believe. Too terrible to even imagine. But why? She whispered. Daniel shook his head slowly. I don't know. All I know is, we weren't supposed to find it. When we radioed for extraction, something went wrong. Our coordinates were leaked. We were ambushed. Everyone else was killed. His voice cracked. I barely escaped. I took as much as I could, some documents, a hard drive, and ran. He looked at her with pleading eyes. They'll kill anyone who knows. Anyone who helped. Emma felt a shiver crawl down her spine. You're saying I'm in danger now too? Daniel gave a tiny nod. I'm sorry. I never meant to drag you into this. But now they'll be watching you. They'll want to know what you know. Emma stood up suddenly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This was too much. Too real. She wasn't cut out for this world of lies and secrets. I need some air, she muttered, moving toward the door. But before she could reach it, it swung open. And Agent Brooks stood there, his face grim. We need to move. Now. Chaos erupted. Alarms blared through the halls. Red warning lights flashed. Outside the small window, Emma saw black SUVs screeching to a halt and heavily armed men pouring out. But these weren't the agents she had seen earlier. Their uniforms were different. Their faces cold, ruthless. Get down. Brooks shouted, pulling Emma away from the window just as bullets shattered the glass. Daniel lunged forward, grabbing Emma's hand. Stay close to me. Without thinking, she clutched his hand tightly. Somehow, even in the madness, his touch gave her a strange sense of grounding. A reminder that they were still alive. Brooks pulled out a small communication device, barking orders into it. Extraction team, now. We have a breach. Repeat, we have a breach. Emma stumbled as Brooks shoved her down a different corridor, Daniel keeping pace despite his weakened state. They found us. Daniel panted. They're not here to arrest us, they're here to erase us. Gunshots echoed through the halls. Agents and intruders clashed violently, shouts and screams filling the air. Emma's mind spun wildly, struggling to process it all. One day ago, she was worrying about coffee refills and late tips. Now, she was running for her life. They burst into a back exit where two black jeeps waited. Brooks shoved Emma and Daniel into one of them. Drive, he barked at the agent behind the wheel. Tires screeched. Bullets ricocheted off the jeep's armored shell as they sped away from the crumbling facility. Emma gasped for air, her heart slamming against her ribs like a trapped bird. Beside her, Daniel gripped her hand tightly. His other hand was pressed against his side, and Emma saw a dark stain spreading across his shirt. You're hurt, she cried. Daniel shook his head weakly. Doesn't matter, we have to get safe first. Brooks turned around in his seat, his expression urgent. We have a safe house about 20 miles out. After that, we'll figure out our next move. Emma nodded numbly, trying to hold herself together. Every bone in her body screamed at her to run, to hide, to find a way back to her old life. But deep down, she knew. There was no going back anymore. The jeep roared down the backroads, weaving through narrow passages and dense trees. Dust clouds swallowed them, shielding their escape. Finally, after what felt like forever, the vehicle pulled into a secluded cabin deep in the woods. It was small and worn down, but it had thick walls and only one entrance. A defensible position. Brooks and his team quickly secured the perimeter, setting up temporary defenses. Emma helped Daniel inside, lowering him gently onto a battered sofa. She grabbed a first aid kit from the wall and, with shaking hands, began patching up his wound. It wasn't deep, thank God. But he was weak, and he needed real medical help soon. Still, he managed a small, grateful smile. "You're pretty good at this." Emma laughed weakly, blinking back tears. "I was a waitress. We're used to fixing things in a hurry." Daniel's smile faded. He gripped her wrist gently. "You didn't have to stay, Emma. You could have walked away." She squeezed his hand back. "I couldn't. I couldn't leave you alone in this." His eyes shone with something, hope, maybe. Or something deeper. Something neither of them dared name yet. As night fell, Brooks gathered Emma, Daniel, and a few trusted agents in the cabin's main room. He laid out a map and a laptop, connecting it to a small portable server. "This," Brooks said grimly, tapping the laptop, "is what you smuggled out, Daniel?" Daniel nodded, his face pale but determined. Brooks began scanning the files. Emma watched, heart pounding, as horrifying images flickered across the screen: medical experiments, caged subjects, tortured civilians. Each photo was worse than the last. It was undeniable proof. Proof of something so dark, so cruel, it could topple governments if exposed. But it wasn't just files and photos. Near the end of the data dump, Brooks found something else. A message. Encrypted, buried deep within the hard drive. Emma leaned forward. "What is it?" Brooks frowned, working furiously to decode it. As the screen flickered and lines of code unraveled, a single sentence appeared. "The storm is only the beginning." Emma shivered. "What does that mean?" Daniel looked up, his face drained of all color. "It means," he said hoarsely, "they're planning something bigger." The room fell into a stunned, heavy silence. Something bigger than secret experiments. Bigger than hidden facilities. Something that hadn't happened yet. Something that could be worse than anything they had already seen. And now, only a handful of people knew about it. Including Emma. Her life, all their lives, would never be the same. Outside the cabin, in the darkness of the woods, a pair of eyes watched through binoculars. A figure in a black uniform spoke quietly into a radio. "They have the drive. Proceed with Phase 2. The night seemed endless. Inside the cabin, a heavy tension filled the air, so thick it was almost choking. Everyone was on edge, weapons ready, nerves fraying. But the real enemy was something they couldn't see. Fear. Doubt. And betrayal. Emma sat at the corner of the room, arms wrapped around herself. She stared blankly at the laptop screen still glowing faintly, the decrypted message burning into her mind. The storm is only the beginning. Beside her, Daniel dozed. Fitfully on the old sofa, his injured side freshly bandaged. He muttered in his sleep, his brow furrowed with invisible pain. Across the room, Agent Brooks and two of his men whispered over the map, their voices tense and low. They were planning their next move, but deep down, Emma felt it. Something was wrong. A storm was coming. And it wasn't just outside. Suddenly, the door creaked open. Agent Ramirez, one of Brooks' trusted men, rushed in, his face pale. "We've got movement," he said, voice shaking. "Drones in the sky. Ground teams moving this way. They'll be here in under an hour." Brooks cursed under his breath. How the hell did they find us so fast? Daniel woke with a start, his body tense. "What's happening?" "They're coming," Emma said softly. "For us." Daniel struggled to sit up. "We need to leave. Now." Brooks nodded grimly. "We split up. Smaller groups. Harder to track. Emma, you go with Daniel. Ramirez and I will draw them off." Emma opened her mouth to argue. But something in Brooks' eyes silenced her. A hard, cold certainty. He knew they were running out of time. Minutes later, the group broke apart. In the dead of night, under the dense cover of trees, Emma and Daniel stumbled through the forest. Their breath puffed in the cold air. Every crack of a twig underfoot made Emma jump. She had never felt so hunted, so raw with fear. Daniel limped beside her, pushing himself far beyond what his injured body should have allowed. But he didn't complain. He just kept moving forward, his hand brushing hers lightly now and then, a silent promise that he was still with her. They had been walking for maybe half an hour when they heard it. The low, menacing hum of drones overhead. Emma yanked Daniel down into the underbrush. They crouched together, barely breathing as bright searchlights scanned the trees. The drones passed overhead, moving west toward where Brooks and the others had gone. Emma allowed herself a tiny breath of relief. Maybe they'd gotten lucky. Maybe the decoy had worked. But deep down, she knew better. Luck wouldn't save them tonight. Hours passed. By the time the sun began to rise, their legs were trembling with exhaustion. They stumbled into a clearing, a small abandoned barn sagging in the morning mist. Daniel nodded toward it. "We'll rest there. Just for a moment." Inside, the barn was damp and smelled of mold and old hay. But it was shelter. And for now, that was enough. Emma helped Daniel settle into a corner, wrapping him in an old tarp she found. She sat beside him, knees drawn to her chest, watching the light slowly fill the barn. "We can't keep running forever," she said quietly. Her voice cracked. "They'll find us. It's only a matter of time." Daniel looked at her, his face tired but determined. "Then we find a way to fight back." Emma wanted to believe him. But fear gnawed at her, darker and deeper than ever before. "What if we can't?" she whispered. "What if we're already too late?" Daniel reached out and took her hand gently in his. "Then at least we'll go down fighting. Not hiding. Not afraid." His touch grounded her, warmed her. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to lean her head against his shoulder. Just for a moment. Just to feel human again. The moment was shattered by a noise outside. The unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel. Emma stiffened. Daniel's eyes snapped open. They exchanged a quick, urgent look. Then, silently, they crawled to the side of the barn and peered through a crack in the wood. A black SUV pulled up, its windows tinted dark. For a moment, no one moved. Then the driver's door opened. And out stepped Agent Brooks. Emma's heart leapt into her throat. Relief surged through her. They were safe. Brooks had found them. She stood up, waving her arms. "Brooks! Over here!" Daniel grabbed her wrist. Hard. "Wait," he hissed. "Something's wrong." Emma frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" "It's Brooks." But Daniel shook his head, his face pale and grim. "Look at his hands." Emma squinted through the crack. Brooks was standing casually by the SUV, his hands resting at his sides. But no weapon. No tension. No urgency. A soldier trained to survive wouldn't act like that when enemies were near. He was too calm. Too confident. As if he knew he had already won. Daniel whispered hoarsely, "He's not here to save us." Emma's blood ran cold. Before she could react, more figures stepped out of the SUV, not agents, but mercenaries in black tactical gear. Their weapons gleamed in the morning light. They fanned out, moving toward the barn. Emma and Daniel backed away from the wall, their hearts hammering. They had seconds, maybe less. "What do we do?" Emma breathed. Daniel scanned the barn quickly. "There," he said, pointing to a small trapdoor near the back, half hidden by old hay. They rushed toward it as quietly as they could. Daniel yanked the trapdoor open, revealing a narrow, crumbling passage leading underground. Without hesitation, they slipped inside, closing the door behind them just as the barn doors were kicked open with a deafening crash. Voices barked orders above. Heavy boots stomped across the wooden floor. Emma and Daniel held their breath, pressed tightly together in the dark, dank passage. The smell of earth and rot filled their nostrils. Above them, Brooks' voice rang out. "Find them. Alive if possible. Dead if necessary." Emma closed her eyes, feeling tears sting. Brooks had betrayed them. They crawled through the narrow tunnel, barely able to move. The walls were closing in, the air getting thinner. But they pushed forward, inch by painful inch. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the tunnel sloped upward, and ended at a loose grate. Daniel pushed it open, and they tumbled out into the forest. Free, for now. But Emma knew it wouldn't last. Not with Brooks hunting them. Not with an entire shadow army at his command. They had to find a way to fight back. And fast. As they stumbled through the woods, Emma turned to Daniel, her voice fierce with a sudden, burning determination. "We need to find the rest of the files. We need to expose the truth." Daniel nodded grimly. "There's a man. He helped me once before, off the record. If anyone can help us now, it's him." "Where is he?" Emma asked. Daniel took a deep breath. "New York City." Emma felt a wave of exhaustion crash over her. But underneath it, a spark ignited. Hope. It was crazy. Impossible. Dangerous. But it was their only chance. They were going to New York. And somehow, they were going to bring the truth into the light. Before it destroyed them all. The city skyline was still a dream far away. For now, survival was all that mattered. Emma gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her heart thudded loudly in her ears as the old pickup truck rattled down the narrow dirt road. Beside her, Daniel leaned against the window, pale and silent. The infection from his wound was getting worse. And they both knew it. They needed to get to New York. They needed to find Daniel's contact, the only man who might still be able to help them. But first, they needed to survive the next few hours. And that was far from guaranteed. Earlier that morning, after escaping the barn, they had found the abandoned truck hidden near an old hunting shack. Keys still in the ignition, a miracle they didn't dare question. Now, every second counted. In the rearview mirror, Emma spotted dust rising. A black SUV, far behind, gaining fast. She pressed the gas pedal to the floor. The truck roared in protest, barely pushing past 60 miles an hour. Daniel coughed, wincing in pain. Emma risked a quick glance at him. "You okay?" He gave a weak smile. "Ask me again when we're not being hunted." Despite everything, she smiled back. A tiny spark of courage in the middle of chaos. The road ahead forked. Left to the main highway, right toward a small private airstrip marked on an old map they found in the truck. Emma's mind raced. If they hit the highway, they'd be sitting ducks. But the airstrip? Maybe, just maybe, they could steal a plane. She swerved hard to the right. The tires screeched as they bounced onto the rugged path leading to the airstrip. The SUV behind them followed, but lost precious seconds making the turn. Seconds that might save their lives. The airstrip appeared like a ghost out of the mist. One battered hangar. One lonely runway. And, incredibly, one small plane sitting ready near the edge. Emma's heart leapt. It was old, but it looked flyable. She skidded the truck to a stop. Daniel stumbled out, barely able to stand. Together, they ran toward the plane. Gunshots rang out behind them. Emma ducked instinctively, dragging Daniel with her. Bullets peppered the ground around them. The mercenaries were closing in. Daniel fumbled with the plane door. Keys, keys, he muttered desperately. Emma spotted a figure slumped inside, an old pilot, unconscious or worse. Without thinking, she climbed into the cockpit, found the keys dangling from the ignition, and turned them. The engine coughed. Then roared to life. "Get in," she screamed. Daniel hauled himself into the seat beside her. Emma shoved the throttle forward. The plane lurched onto the runway, gathering speed painfully slowly. Behind them, mercenaries fired wildly. One bullet shattered the back window. Another grazed the tail. But the plane kept moving. Faster. Faster. Emma yanked back the controls. And the small aircraft lifted into the sky. They were airborne. For now. Breathing hard, Emma glanced at Daniel. His head lolled against the seat, his skin ashen. She set the plane on a steady course east toward New York, then reached over to check his pulse. It was there, but weak. They needed medical help. And soon. Emma wiped sweat from her forehead, focusing hard on keeping the plane steady. Flying wasn't exactly her specialty, but right now, it was their only hope. Minutes dragged into hours. Clouds gathered above, dark and heavy. A storm was brewing. As if they needed another problem. Daniel stirred beside her. His voice was hoarse. We have to find Eddie." Emma leaned closer. "Who's Eddie?" "My old buddy, from recon missions. He's deep undercover now. If anyone can hide us, it's him." Emma nodded grimly. "Where in New York?" Daniel gave a weak chuckle. "That's the tricky part. He moves around. But he usually checks in at an old diner in Queens. Rosie's." Emma stored the information in her mind. First, land the plane. Then find Rosie's. Simple enough. If they survived the landing. If the mercenaries didn't find them first. 1,000 ifs. None comforting. The storm broke just as they reached the outskirts of New York. Rain hammered the windshield. Lightning split the sky in jagged forks. The small plane bucked and dipped violently. Emma fought the controls with all her strength. Her arms ached. Her eyes burned from staring into the blinding rain. She spotted a small abandoned field below, barely big enough for a landing. No time to find anything better. She circled once, lowered the landing gear, and prayed. The plane hit the ground hard, bouncing and skidding through mud and wet grass. For a terrifying moment, Emma thought they would flip. But the plane finally shuddered to a stop. Silence. Except for the rain pounding on the roof. They had made it. Somehow. Emma helped Daniel out of the plane, half carrying him toward a line of trees at the edge of the field. In the distance, sirens wailed. Someone had spotted them. No time to waste. They slipped into the woods, soaked to the skin but alive. Every step was agony for Daniel, but he kept moving. He refused to be left behind. Together, they made their way toward the city lights glowing faintly through the rain. Toward Rosie's. Toward hope. Or whatever was waiting for them. By the time they stumbled into Queens, it was nearly midnight. The city felt strange, both familiar and foreign. Like stepping into a dream you couldn't wake from. They found Rosie's, a battered old diner tucked between closed shops and graffiti-covered walls. The neon sign flickered weakly. Emma pushed the door open. A tiny bell jingled overhead. Inside, the diner was almost empty. Just a sleepy cook behind the counter, and one customer at a corner booth. A man with a gray beard and sharp eyes. He looked up as they entered. His gaze landed on Daniel. And hardened. He stood slowly, one hand drifting casually toward his jacket. Toward a weapon hidden underneath. Emma froze. Had they walked into another trap? Daniel coughed weakly. "Eddie," he croaked. "It's me." The man's hand paused. Then he smiled grimly. "About damn time, soldier." Eddie hustled them into the back of the diner, locking the door behind them. In a small, hidden room, he patched up Daniel's wound with rough efficiency. Emma watched anxiously, barely daring to breathe. Finally, Eddie leaned back. "He's stable. For now." Emma sank into a chair, exhausted beyond words. Eddie studied her carefully. "You're the waitress he kept talking about, huh?" Emma nodded. "Name's Emma." Eddie grunted. "Well, Emma, you just bought yourself a whole lot of trouble." He pulled out a battered laptop and slid it across the table. "Daniel told me enough. I know you're carrying files they'd kill to erase." Emma's heart pounded. "How bad is it?" Eddie's face was grim. "Bad enough that if they catch you, it won't just be you two dead. It'll be anyone who ever knew you." Emma swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Eddie tapped the laptop. "You're gonna leak everything. Tonight. Before they can shut you down." Emma stared at the screen. The weight of it hit her like a punch. The truth could save them. Or destroy them. Maybe both. But there was no turning back now. As Emma began uploading the encrypted files, Eddie turned to Daniel. "You didn't tell her everything, did you?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "No." Emma looked between them, confused. "Tell me what?" Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. Then he whispered. "The files. They're not just about the mercenaries. They're about something bigger. Something buried deep inside our own government." Emma's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Daniel opened his eyes. "They started all of this. They're the ones funding the mercenaries. Using them to silence anyone who gets too close to the truth." Emma felt the room tilt around her. Everything she thought she knew shattered in an instant. They weren't just running from criminals. They were running from their own country. Outside, engines rumbled. Black SUVs pulled into the empty street, headlights off, silent and deadly. Eddie glanced out the window and swore under his breath. "They found us." Emma's fingers flew over the keyboard, racing to finish the upload. Daniel struggled to his feet, pulling a hidden pistol from Eddie's stash. They had minutes. Maybe seconds. The trap was closing. But this time, they weren't going down without a fight. The cold wind howled outside Rosie's diner. The heavy rain blurred the windows, turning the streetlights into bleeding smears of color. Inside, time had frozen. Emma's hands shook slightly as she hit the final button, upload. The progress bar crept forward painfully slow. 88%. 89%. 90%. Outside, the black SUVs parked silently. Doors opened. Men in dark suits and tactical gear stepped out. They moved like shadows, surrounding the diner. Daniel stood by the window, pale but standing strong, pistol gripped tightly. Eddie locked the last door and pulled a battered shotgun from under the counter. Emma's heart pounded against her ribs. They were 3 people. Tired. Injured. Outgunned. But they had something the men outside didn't. The truth. And right now, it was uploading to the world. Eddie moved fast. He overturned tables, creating makeshift barricades. Daniel helped, gritting his teeth against the pain. Emma joined without being asked. Outside, footsteps approached. Voices barked low commands. Emma checked the laptop again. 95%. Almost there. She wiped her sweaty palms on her jeans and grabbed a kitchen knife, the only other weapon she could find. It wasn't much. But she wasn't planning to go down easy. The first bang rattled the front door. They were trying to break in. Eddie cocked the shotgun, his jaw set like stone. "Let Em try," he muttered. Another bang, harder this time. Then the sharp crack of glass shattering. A flashbang grenade rolled into the diner. Without thinking, Eddie kicked it back out the broken window. A muffled explosion lit up the night outside. Screams followed. Someone got hurt. But more were coming. The front door crashed open. Dark figures flooded in, guns raised. Everything happened at once. Eddie fired. Daniel fired. Emma ducked behind the counter, heart hammering, gripping her knife tightly. Gunfire ripped through the diner. Wood splintered. Plates shattered. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. Emma peeked over the counter. Daniel took down one man with a clean shot. Eddie dropped another, but a bullet grazed his shoulder, sending him stumbling. Emma saw one mercenary creeping toward Daniel from the side. Without thinking, she leapt from her hiding spot, knife raised. She drove it into the attacker's arm. He screamed, dropping his weapon. Daniel turned and finished him with a shot. Emma grabbed the fallen man's gun, adrenaline surging through her. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a fighter. The laptop beeped. Upload complete. Emma's heart soared. The files, all the evidence of corruption, the betrayal, the murders, were now live. Out of reach of their enemies. Someone, somewhere, would see it. Someone would listen. But for now, they had to survive the night. The mercenaries pulled back, regrouping outside. Daniel leaned heavily against the counter, blood seeping through his shirt. Eddie reloaded slowly, his face grim. "We can't hold much longer," he said. Emma gripped her stolen gun tighter. She refused to give up. Daniel looked at her, his voice hoarse but steady. "You did it, Emma. You got the truth out." Emma blinked back tears. They had come so far. Lost so much. But it wasn't over yet. Outside, engines roared. More SUVs were coming. Back up. Suddenly, a loud whooshing sound filled the air. Emma ran to the shattered window. She gasped. Helicopters. Not enemy helicopters. These were news choppers. Police choppers. The files had triggered an immediate response. The world knew. And now, the eyes of the world were on them. The mercenaries froze outside, realizing too late. They weren't operating in the shadows anymore. Spotlights from the helicopters bathed the street in blinding white light. Loudspeakers barked. "Drop your weapons. You are surrounded." Chaos exploded. Some mercenaries tried to run. Others dropped their guns and raised their hands. Police vehicles screeched onto the scene, officers pouring out, weapons drawn. Emma, Daniel, and Eddie watched, stunned. They had survived. Against all odds. Inside the diner, Daniel slumped to the floor, exhausted. Emma rushed to him, checking his pulse. Still strong. He was alive. Paramedics rushed in seconds later, treating Daniel and Eddie. A tall police officer approached Emma. "Are you Emma Carter?" She nodded numbly. He gave a small smile. "You're a damn hero, miss. You just exposed one of the biggest conspiracies in recent history." Emma swallowed hard, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. It didn't feel like heroism. It felt like survival. Desperation. Hope. But maybe that's what heroes were made of. 2 weeks later. The world had changed. News outlets exploded with the story. Top government officials resigned. Some were arrested. Massive reforms were promised. Daniel recovered slowly but surely, staying hidden under federal protection. Eddie disappeared into the shadows again, his role played, his debt repaid. And Emma? Emma stood outside a small cafe in Brooklyn, a new life beginning. She had offers from newspapers, TV shows, even book deals. But she didn't want fame. She wanted peace. She got a small apartment. Started working at the cafe. Simple, quiet. But inside her burned a new strength. She knew the world could be dark. Brutal. Unfair. But she also knew she had the power to fight back. One afternoon, Daniel showed up at her cafe. He looked better, stronger. He sat at the counter and smiled. "Mind if I sit a while?" Emma grinned. "Only if you're tipping big." They laughed, real, free laughter. Life wasn't easy. It never would be. But they had survived the worst. And they weren't alone anymore. No matter how dark the world gets, a single brave act, even from an ordinary person, can spark a revolution. You don't have to be powerful to change the world. You just have to be willing to stand up. Emma was just a waitress. But when the moment came, she became the voice of the voiceless. And that changed everything.